It all started when your life seemed stuck for no clear reason. You were doing everything right, trying, pushing, waiting, yet nothing moved. Doors stayed closed, plans froze mid-air, and even your motivation felt heavier than usual. You began to wonder if maybe life had quietly made a decision about you. What if it has? What if the reality around you already knows where you're meant to go and is simply waiting for you to notice the signs? Because sometimes it's not that life has stopped, it's that it's redirecting you toward what's real. Have you noticed how certain patterns repeat in your life, almost like an invisible script? You meet the same kind of person wearing a different face. You change jobs, cities, or goals, but somehow the same frustrations find their way back to you. It's as if reality keeps recycling moments until you finally pause long enough to see the hidden lesson behind them. You might call it coincidence, but coincidence rarely repeats with such precision. Life is not random, it's responsive. It mirrors what you keep broadcasting beneath the surface. Your beliefs, your expectations, your quiet fears. And until you recognize what part of you keeps recreating the same situation, it will continue showing up like a teacher who refuses to let you skip the class you keep failing. Think about it. That friend who always betrays your trust, the opportunities that collapse at the last minute, the constant feeling of being almost there but never quite arriving. Different scenes, same emotion underneath. That's not bad luck. That's feedback. Reality is trying to bring something into focus that you've been unconsciously avoiding. Patterns exist to reveal what still runs your life without your permission. The reason they repeat isn't to punish you. It's to give you another chance to wake up. Because awareness breaks repetition. Once you truly observe a pattern, without defending, blaming, or numbing it, it begins to lose its power over you. Imagine reality as a mirror that doesn't just reflect your face, but your inner stance. When you walk past it hurriedly, you barely see the details. But when you stop, when you really look, you notice the tension in your shoulders, the worry in your eyes, the way you've been carrying the same story for years. That's what these recurring situations are. Mirrors held by life to show you what still needs your attention. There's a moment, subtle but powerful, when you start noticing the pattern instead of just reacting to it. Maybe it's when you realize that every argument ends the same way. Not because people never change, but because you keep responding from the same wound. Maybe it's when you see that your goals always burn you out. Not because the world is cruel, but because you've tied your worth to endless striving. When this awareness clicks, something extraordinary happens. The pattern loses its grip. Because now you're no longer a character trapped inside the script. You're the one reading it. And from that vantage point, you can start to edit the story. But here's the tricky part. Observing doesn't mean judging yourself. Most people, when they finally see their repeated patterns, rush to self-blame. Why do I always do this? That's still the ego reacting. Observation is quieter. It's looking at your life like a scientist examines data. Curious, patient, detached from outcome. The goal isn't to fix, it's to understand. Because once you understand, the shift happens naturally. Try this. Recall a situation that frustrates you over and over. It could be a type of relationship, a challenge with money, or a recurring emotion like feeling unseen. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me again?" ask, "What is this situation showing me about how I see myself?" That single question moves you from victimhood to authorship. And once you start asking that way, life begins to answer differently. The same situations may appear, but they no longer control you. You start to see the subtle choices that feed them, the tone of your words, the timing of your reactions, the stories you tell yourself about what's possible. You start realizing that patterns aren't cages, they're blueprints. They outline the shape of your unconscious beliefs. Change the belief and the blueprint redraws itself. Of course, this process isn't comfortable. Observation always demands honesty, and honesty can sting. It requires you to admit that the common denominator in every repeating story is you. But that's not bad news, it's liberation. Because if you are part of the cause, you are also part of the solution. Sometimes the moment you truly see a pattern, it dissolves without effort. Other times it keeps showing up, but now you respond differently, calmer, wiser, less reactive. That's how you know transformation is taking root. Life doesn't change all at once. It adjusts itself around your awareness. You'll begin to notice how the same events that once triggered you now reveal information. The argument becomes a signal of where your boundaries are weak. The delay becomes a lesson in patience. The loss becomes a doorway to something more authentic. And in this way, what used to feel like repetition turns into refinement. Reality's intelligence works like this. It never stops teaching you. When you ignore the whisper, it repeats the message a little louder, a little closer, until you can't look away. The repetition is compassion in disguise, life giving you as many chances as you need to wake up to yourself. And here's where things start to shift in a deeper way. Once you learn to observe instead of react, reality itself begins to change texture. The same situations that once trapped you now become transparent, revealing the mechanism behind them. It's like suddenly seeing the gears inside a clock. You understand how time moves and you stop fighting it. But not everyone reaches that point. Most people stay stuck in reaction, repeating loops without realizing that their own attention fuels them. The next step, the one that transforms everything, is learning how to stop reacting automatically and start observing consciously. Because that's where your real power begins. It sounds simple, but this one distinction changes everything. Reaction is automatic, a reflex born from fear, habit, and unexamined memory. Observation, on the other hand, is awareness in motion. One tightens you, the other opens you. One repeats the past, the other creates a new possibility. You can see it in the smallest moments. Someone criticizes you, and before you even think, your body tightens, your tone sharpens, your defenses rise. You're no longer responding to the present. You're reliving an old story. Maybe it's the story of being misunderstood, or the fear of not being enough. Whatever it is, the moment you react, you surrender authorship. Reality stops being something you shape and becomes something that controls you. Reacting is like adding gasoline to a fire you claim you don't want. You say you want peace, but the way you rush to prove a point fuels conflict. You say you want change, but the way you panic at discomfort keeps you locked in the same pattern. Reaction disguises itself as action, but it's not the same thing. Reaction is impulsive. Action, when born from observation, is intelligent. When you observe instead of react, you step outside the movie for a second. You see the script, the scene, the emotion, but you're no longer lost inside it. That tiny pause, that breath before you respond, is where your freedom lives. It's the space where transformation begins. Observation doesn't mean being passive. It doesn't mean pretending not to care. It means you're awake enough to choose your next move, instead of being dragged by an emotion that doesn't belong to the moment. The observer sees the wave coming, but doesn't drown in it. The reactor gets pulled under every time. Most people never realize how much of their life is lived in reaction. They wake up already chasing, already worrying, already defending a story they didn't even choose. Someone looks at them a certain way, and their mood shifts. A message is left on read, and they spiral. Reality becomes a series of triggers instead of a landscape to navigate consciously. This isn't because people are weak. It's because reactivity feels like protection. When you've been hurt or disappointed, reacting gives a temporary sense of control. It's the nervous system's way of saying, if I fight back, maybe I won't get hurt again. But in truth, every reaction keeps you chained to the same emotion you're trying to escape. Observation, however, is a form of quiet power. It doesn't need to prove, defend, or control. It simply notices, and noticing changes everything. Neuroscience calls this the pause effect. When you witness your own thoughts and emotions, instead of acting them out, different parts of the brain activate. The amygdala, your fear center, calms down, and the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reasoning and choice, lights up. You literally shift your biology by observing instead of reacting. Try this for a moment. Think of the last time something or someone triggered you. Replay it slowly, not to judge yourself, but to see the exact moment the emotion took over. What did you feel in your body? A tightening in the chest, a rush of heat in your face? That's the moment where observation could have entered. If instead of responding immediately, you had just noticed, not analyzed, not suppressed, just noticed, you would have interrupted the cycle. That's the power of awareness. It turns every emotional storm into usable information. When you start observing your reactions, you realize they are signals, not enemies. Anger shows where a boundary is unclear. Jealousy reveals what you believe you lack. Fear points to where you've stopped trusting life. Observation translates reactivity into understanding. The most profound changes often come from the smallest pauses. One breath before replying to that message, 1 second of silence before raising your voice, one conscious exhale before deciding what to do next. Those brief spaces seem invisible, but they're where entire futures are rewritten. Because in that space, you're no longer being pulled by the past, you're choosing from presence. Observation also rewires how reality responds to you. When you stop reacting, situations begin to lose their sharpness. Conflict dissolves faster. People sense your calm and mirror it. Opportunities that used to slip by unnoticed start to appear. Why? Because when you observe, your energy becomes coherent, and coherence attracts clarity. The challenge, of course, is remembering to pause when everything inside you screams to react. The mind loves drama. It thrives on "how dare they" and "this always happens." But awareness is like a muscle. The more you practice it, the stronger it gets. At first, you'll remember after the fact, after the argument, after the decision, after the regret. That's okay. Even noticing that you forgot to observe is part of the training. Over time, the gap between stimulus and response widens. You begin to notice thoughts before they become words, emotions before they become actions. You start seeing how much of what once seemed uncontrollable is actually a matter of awareness. Life doesn't stop testing you, but now you see the test coming. And in those moments of observation, something beautiful happens. Reality becomes less personal. You stop taking everything as an attack or a punishment. You start seeing patterns, lessons, feedback. You start realizing that life isn't out to get you. It's trying to wake you. Still, many people resist this shift because observing feels too slow in a world obsessed with reacting fast. We're trained to respond instantly, to texts, to news, to emotions. But the truth is, slowness is strength. It's in stillness that you see clearly. You can feel when you're reacting versus observing. Reaction feels tight, rushed, urgent. Observation feels spacious, grounded, unshaken. Reaction demands control. Observation trusts process. And that trust is what allows reality to move things in your favor without your constant interference. Because when you stop reacting, you stop fighting the flow of life. And when you stop fighting, life starts guiding. But sometimes that guidance doesn't come gently. There are moments when everything around you begins to fall apart, not as punishment, but as a deeper redirection. And that's exactly where we're heading next. You know the feeling. Plans that once seemed solid begin to crumble. People drift away without explanation. The things that used to excite you lose their spark. You try harder, you push, you fix, you plan. But the more you force, the heavier everything feels. It's as if reality itself has decided to stop cooperating with your efforts. Most people panic at that moment. They think they're being punished, that they've made a wrong turn, that life is slipping out of their control. But what's really happening is something far more intelligent. When everything starts going wrong, it's not chaos, it's correction. It's reality adjusting your path to something your mind can't yet see. There comes a stage when the life you built from survival can no longer hold the person you're becoming. And that's when reality starts dismantling what no longer fits. You might call it a breakdown, but it's actually a breakthrough disguised as loss. The timing is rarely convenient, and it never feels fair, but it's precise. Life waits until you're strong enough to lose what's false before it starts stripping it away. Think of it like a forest fire that clears old growth so new life can emerge. It looks destructive, but it's restorative. The problem is, when you're standing inside the flames, all you can feel is the burning. You can't yet see what's being made possible underneath. There's a kind of intelligence in reality that works through friction. It lets comfort stretch just long enough for you to mistake it for safety, then begins to remove it. Not to harm you, but to wake you. Because if things never fell apart, you'd never question them. You'd never ask deeper questions. You'd never evolve. Every wrong turn, every closed door, every delayed answer, they all carry the same message. You've outgrown this version of yourself. But the human mind clings to familiarity like oxygen. It tries to glue the old pieces back together instead of asking why they fell apart in the first place. That's where most suffering comes from, not from change itself, but from resisting what's already changing. When things stop working, your first instinct is to fix. But sometimes fixing is the wrong response. Sometimes the lesson is to let the structure collapse so you can finally see what was holding it up. Reality knows exactly which illusions you still depend on, and it dismantles them with surgical precision. You lose a job, not because you failed, but because you needed freedom to redirect your energy. A relationship ends, not because love died, but because truth demanded space. A plan unravels, not because life betrayed you, but because life refused to let you settle. At first, it feels cruel. But later, when the dust clears, you realize that everything that went wrong was actually setting you right. The turning point comes when you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to show me?" That question changes the entire vibration of your experience. You stop fighting the correction and start learning from it. You start seeing that chaos is often life's most honest feedback. It tells you exactly where you've been pretending. Sometimes the universe removes your distractions all at once. You feel alone, stripped, uncertain. That emptiness is not punishment. It's preparation. It's creating space for alignment. Because as long as you're filled with what no longer serves you, there's no room for what's meant to arrive. It's easy to look back and see this truth in hindsight. You remember times when you thought you'd lost everything. And now, you wouldn't trade those moments for anything. They built clarity, depth, resilience. But when you're in the middle of it, all you can see is what's falling apart. That's when observation becomes crucial. You can't stop the storm, but you can stop calling it destruction. You can start calling it redesign. And if you look closely, you'll notice that the breakdown follows a rhythm. First comes discomfort, a quiet sense that something isn't working anymore. Then resistance. You try to force the old way to function again. Then collapse. Life removes what you refuse to release. And finally, clarity. The calm after the storm where you realize the loss was never loss at all, but direction. This cycle happens in every layer of life. Relationships, careers, health, identity. It's not a one-time event. It's the pulse of transformation itself. Reality doesn't evolve you through comfort. It evolves you through contrast. Every wrong is a recalibration. Every detour a message. It's time to move differently. But here's what's easy to forget. You're not meant to stay in that collapse forever. The point isn't to live in pain or constantly start over. The point is to recognize when life is speaking through disruption and to stop interpreting it as failure. That's the moment you start cooperating with change instead of resisting it. When you can hold stillness in the middle of what's falling apart, you start sensing an invisible order inside the chaos. You start feeling guided instead of cursed. You realize that what's collapsing is not you. It's the version of you that could no longer hold what's next. The more you learn to trust this process, the faster the realignment happens. Life doesn't need to destroy what you're willing to release. It only goes wrong when you cling too tightly to what needs to evolve. And once you begin to see this pattern clearly, another truth becomes impossible to ignore. You are not where you are by accident. You are exactly where you are because this moment, this challenge, this pause, this friction, is showing you what you've tolerated for far too long. It's a hard truth to swallow, but an even harder one to ignore once it lands. Every situation you've stayed in, every boundary you allowed to blur, every maybe later you whispered to yourself, they've all quietly shaped the reality you're standing in now. Life doesn't trap you. Tolerance does. What you accept silently, you sign energetically. At first, tolerance feels harmless. You tell yourself it's not that bad. You convince yourself to be patient, to keep the peace, to wait until things get better. You lower your standards little by little, one small compromise at a time, until one day you wake up and realize you've built a life that reflects not your desires but your endurance. You've mistaken surviving for living. Reality doesn't respond to what you wish for, it mirrors what you're willing to settle for. If you keep showing up to situations that drain you, if you keep saying yes when your whole body says no, life assumes you're choosing that experience. It keeps feeding you the same energy you've already agreed to. Not because it's cruel, but because it thinks that's what you've chosen to learn through. Tolerance is often disguised as kindness. You tell yourself you're being patient, compassionate, loyal. But look deeper. Is it love or fear of confrontation? Is it faith or avoidance? Many people stay in unfulfilling circumstances not because they can't leave, but because leaving would force them to redefine themselves. The comfort of familiarity feels safer than the uncertainty of self-respect. Every time you tolerate something that doesn't align with who you are, you teach reality that this is the level you're willing to play at. And reality listens. It calibrates itself around your thresholds, your unspoken limits, your quiet, it's fine. But nothing changes until you raise the price of your peace. Think about it. The job that constantly drains you, the relationship that keeps circling the same arguments, the habit that numbs more than it heals. They all stay because you allow them to. That might sound harsh, but it's empowering once you see it clearly. If tolerance built this version of your life, boundaries can build the next one. Awareness is the first shift. You start noticing how your energy drops when you walk into certain spaces, how your body tightens when you hear certain voices, how your mind starts defending what your intuition already knows is wrong. That's the language of reality whispering back to you, this isn't home anymore. You don't break patterns by fighting them, you break them by refusing to keep feeding them. The moment you stop tolerating what's misaligned, the system begins to reorganize itself. At first it feels like loss. Friends pull away, opportunities disappear, things you once relied on stop working. But underneath the noise, a higher order is forming. What matches your new level of clarity can only reach you once the noise clears. Most people never realize that what they call bad luck is often accumulated tolerance. They let disrespect slide. They explain away red flags. They keep waiting for others to change instead of changing what they allow. Over time, these small surrenders become a landscape, one where frustration feels normal and peace feels like a luxury. You can tell what you've been tolerating by looking at what drains you. The things that exhaust you daily are not random, they are feedback. Every time you ignore that signal, life amplifies it. Fatigue grows, disconnection deepens. Eventually, reality raises the volume so loud that you can't pretend not to hear. And that's where many people confuse crisis with cruelty. They think life is being unfair when in truth, life is simply enforcing the standards they never set. It's removing what they no longer have the strength to tolerate consciously. You can resist it and suffer, or you can observe it and adjust. Raising your standard doesn't mean arrogance, Guillaume, it means honesty. It's saying, I no longer accept this version of myself who keeps shrinking to make others comfortable. It's saying, I deserve environments that feel aligned with peace, not survival. The moment you claim that truth, reality begins to rearrange in your favor. It doesn't always happen fast, but it always happens. Of course, this shift isn't painless. The moment you stop tolerating what's been comfortable, the world around you reacts. People who benefited from your silence might resist your new boundaries. Circumstances that fed on your compliance may collapse. It feels lonely at first, but it's a sacred loneliness, the kind that precedes expansion. You begin to see how much energy you used to spend maintaining what was never meant for you. You start reclaiming that energy and investing it in clarity, creativity, and direction. What once felt like chaos starts to feel like cleansing. You are where you are because of what you allowed, and you'll move forward the moment you start allowing differently. This realization doesn't condemn you, it empowers you. Because if tolerance built this reality, then awareness can unbuild it. You have the right and the responsibility to decide what no longer gets access to your energy. The challenge is to keep that awareness alive when things start shifting. The moment you begin setting boundaries, life will test them. It will ask, are you sure? People will return with apologies. Old patterns will whisper, maybe this time it'll be different. But reality doesn't change through promises. It changes through consistency. When you stop tolerating the unnecessary, Space opens up for the authentic. The noise quiets. Your decisions become cleaner. Your path becomes visible again. And yet, paradoxically, the more control you try to assert in this process, the more chaotic life can feel. Because alignment doesn't come from control, it comes from awareness. And that's where the next lesson begins. Learning that the tighter you hold on, the more life pushes back. You've probably noticed it. Those moments when you tighten your grip on life, when you plan every detail, monitor every outcome, and push harder just to make sure nothing slips through the cracks. But somehow, the harder you try to keep things in order, the faster they unravel. The relationship you try to manage becomes distant. The project you obsess over hits unexpected blocks. The more you chase stability, the more unstable everything seems to get. It's as if reality senses your tension and mirrors it back. Because control doesn't create safety, it signals fear. And fear, when amplified, distorts everything it touches. At first, control feels productive. You tell yourself you're being responsible, proactive, prepared. But beneath that surface, there's a quiet anxiety whispering, if I don't hold everything together, it will all fall apart. That's not awareness. That's survival mode, disguised as discipline. It's the nervous system's way of saying, I don't trust life enough to let it move naturally. Control is a beautiful illusion. It gives you the feeling of power without the substance of peace. You make endless lists, set constant reminders, check in on others, double-check your own plans. You're doing everything right, yet you're exhausted. Because control doesn't just organize your outer world, it drains your inner world. Every bit of mental energy spent holding on tight is energy taken away from presence, intuition, and flow. Reality, however, works on a different frequency. It's not built to be dominated, it's built to be danced with. When you try to manage every step, the rhythm gets lost. The music stops making sense, but when you loosen your grip, when you allow the unexpected, when you trust timing, the rhythm finds you again. That's when synchronicities happen. That's when things begin to align effortlessly. Think about the last time you tried to force something, a plan, a relationship, a decision. You pushed, you strategized, you obsessed, and still, it didn't work the way you wanted. But maybe, months later, you realized why. Maybe what you were fighting for wasn't meant to fit the person you were becoming. That moment of collapse wasn't failure. It was recalibration. The paradox is that chaos often increases when you're out of alignment. The tighter you hold, the louder life gets, because reality keeps trying to show you where you're out of flow. It's not punishing you, it's correcting you. The noise you interpret as everything going wrong is often the sound of life breaking apart, what no longer matches your truth. You can feel the difference between control and clarity. Control feels heavy, full of pressure and tension. Clarity feels light, grounded, but open. When you act from clarity, you don't need to force outcomes. You simply move with what's available. You make choices, but you don't demand certainty. You trust that what aligns will remain, and what resists isn't meant to be held. That trust doesn't come from blind faith. It comes from observation, from noticing the countless times life worked out better when you stopped trying to manage it. Think of the opportunities that appeared the moment you let go of the plan that wasn't working. Think of the people who entered your life only after the ones you clung to finally left. The pattern is always there. Control collapses, but surrender rearranges. Still, letting go isn't easy. Control gives you something to do with your fear. It makes you feel active, needed, relevant. The moment you stop trying to control, silence enters, and silence is uncomfortable. It forces you to feel the uncertainty you were trying to outrun. That's why surrender feels like falling at first. But if you stay with it, you realize you're not falling, you're floating. There's a strange kind of intelligence in chaos. It dismantles the structures that were built on fear so that something real can take their place. The job loss that humbles your ego. The relationship that ends when you finally stop fixing it. The delay that reroutes you toward a better opportunity. Each time, life removes what was never truly stable to make space for what is. When you observe rather than control, you begin to see that chaos isn't random. It's responsive. It mirrors the level of resistance inside you. The moments that feel most turbulent often reveal where you've been gripping the hardest. And the instant you soften, mentally, emotionally, energetically, things begin to settle. Not because the outer world changed, but because your inner signal did. Reality has a way of rewarding trust. The second you stop forcing outcomes, small coincidences start to appear. The right person calls, the timing aligns, the pressure fades. It's not magic, it's coherence. When your energy stops vibrating with fear, life stops mirroring it. But this doesn't mean you stop caring or stop taking action. It means your actions come from awareness, not panic. You still move, plan, and decide, but you're not gripping outcomes that were never yours to control. You learn to distinguish between influence and interference. Influence is when you participate with intention. Interference is when you demand certainty. The more you learn to live from observation instead of control, the more peaceful your reality becomes. Because peace isn't the absence of movement. It's the absence of resistance. It's not that chaos disappears. It's that it no longer defines you. You stop reacting to every shift and start reading it like a message. Life is not something to be mastered like a system. It's something to be understood like a language. The moment you stop shouting commands at it, you start hearing what it's been saying all along. Sometimes that message comes through stillness, and sometimes it comes through removal. People, habits, circumstances that fall away with no clear explanation. And that's where the next truth begins to reveal itself. When things start leaving your life without warning, it's rarely a loss. It's usually alignment in disguise. You can feel it when it happens. One day you're close to someone, maybe a friend, a partner, a colleague, and the connection begins to fade. Messages slow down. Conversations that once felt natural turn heavy. Sometimes there's a reason, sometimes there isn't. But the space between you grows until one day you realize they're gone. And no matter how much you replay the story in your head, you can't find a moment that explains it. This is where most people get stuck, trying to solve an emotional equation that doesn't have logical answers. But reality doesn't always remove people through logic. It does it through frequency. When your inner world shifts, the outer world rearranges to match it. It's not punishment, it's resonance. Every person in your life holds a specific vibration, a rhythm of energy, thought, and emotion that interacts with your own. When you begin to grow, to heal, to become more self-aware, that rhythm changes. And when frequencies no longer match, connection becomes friction. Conversations start to feel forced. Silence begins to feel heavy. What you once called chemistry turns into static. Life notices this before you do. It starts to create distance, not because it's cruel, but because it knows that forcing old frequencies to stay together only creates noise. When you enter a new state of being, the people who belong to that level begin to appear naturally, just as those who no longer align start to drift. The transition looks like loss, but it's actually refinement. Sometimes the removal is gentle, a slow drifting apart that feels like life quietly rearranging your social map. Other times it's abrupt, a conflict, a betrayal, a misunderstanding that cuts the connection instantly. But whether it's quiet or chaotic, the intention is the same. Reality clearing space for coherence. When you cling to relationships that no longer resonate, you block movement. You anchor yourself to old versions of you, versions that existed before your current awareness. That's why letting go often feels like grief. You're not just losing a person, you're shedding a self. It's natural to want to hold on. After all, these are people who shared your past, who knew your stories, who witnessed parts of you that few others did. But staying attached to what no longer fits is like trying to wear a coat that once kept you warm, but now restricts your breathing. It's not betrayal to outgrow someone, it's evidence that you're changing. The universe has a precise way of editing your circle. It removes who distracts you from your direction and introduces who aligns with your expansion. You don't need to chase or replace. Your only task is to stay open, to trust that absence always precedes arrival. When someone exits your life, it doesn't mean the connection was meaningless. It means it served its purpose. Think of every significant person you've lost. At the time, it probably felt random or unfair, but look at who you became afterward. Look at what you learned. Some people enter your life to awaken you to love, others to teach boundaries, others to mirror the parts of yourself you hadn't yet faced. They were never meant to stay forever. They were meant to move you forward. And sometimes, their departure is not even about them. It's about you stepping into a new alignment that can't support what once was. When you stop matching someone's energy, their presence naturally fades. There's no need for dramatic closure. The distance is the closure. The hardest part is the silence that follows. When someone leaves, the mind searches for reasons. Did I do something wrong? Could I have fixed it? But reality often doesn't give answers until you've stopped asking from pain. Only when you quiet the story can you hear the deeper truth. That endings are not personal. They're energetic. This is why you must resist the urge to chase people who have already vibrated out of your path. Chasing them pulls you back into an outdated frequency. You don't owe anyone endless access to your energy just because they once had it. Relationships, like everything in life, are meant to evolve. Some continue with you, others remain as memories that shaped you. The space left behind by those who leave is not empty, it's fertile. It's the ground where new resonance takes root. But if you fill that space too quickly, trying to distract yourself from the ache, you miss the point. The point is to sit in that emptiness long enough to meet the version of you that no longer depends on old attachments for validation. You might not see it now, but each removal is a kind of alignment ceremony. Reality is saying, you've reached a new frequency. Let me adjust your surroundings accordingly. It's the same principle as pruning a tree. The cutting looks harsh, but it's what allows new branches to grow stronger and fuller. If you pay attention, you'll notice a rhythm to these transitions. They often come right after deep internal shifts, after you've chosen more honesty, more peace, more awareness. That's when life starts clearing what contradicts those choices. The pattern is precise. The moment you commit to your truth, everything untrue begins to dissolve. Still, it hurts. Even knowing the purpose doesn't erase the ache. There's a certain emptiness that comes with evolution, the quiet after release. But if you can stay present with that space instead of rushing to fill it, you'll feel something subtle underneath the grief. Lightness, freedom, an unfamiliar calm that tells you you're no longer carrying what isn't yours. People leave not because they failed you, but because their role in your story reached its end. And just as some are being removed, others are already making their way toward you, people whose energy will match the person you're becoming, not the one you were. And if you can trust that process, if you can allow what's leaving to leave, you'll notice another pattern forming beneath it. Sometimes the answers you've been waiting for arrive disguised as problems, delays, or discomforts that force you to look closer at what's truly in front of you. Since childhood, you've been told to dream big, to set intentions, to visualize, to ask the universe, God, or life itself for what you desire. You've been taught to want clearly, to pray with faith, to manifest with confidence. But no one really taught you how to recognize the answer when it comes, especially when it doesn't look the way you imagined. You ask for courage, and life sends you a situation that scares you enough to reveal it. You ask for patience, and delays multiply until you have no choice but to breathe. You ask for strength, and everything that once held you up begins to crumble so that you can learn to hold yourself. You ask for clarity, and people start leaving, routines shift, and comfort disappears. But instead of recognizing these moments as responses, you call them problems. You think life ignored your request when in truth it delivered it perfectly, just in a form that forced you to grow. We were trained to look for blessings wrapped in beauty. We expect our prayers to arrive gently, as gifts, not as disruptions. But reality doesn't work that way. It doesn't hand you what you want. It gives you what will make you ready for it. And that readiness rarely feels peaceful at first. It feels like confusion, loss, even disappointment, because the mind judges everything by comfort, while life measures by alignment. There are moments when what you've asked for stands directly in front of you, disguised as the very thing you're resisting. Maybe it's an opportunity that scares you because it stretches you. Maybe it's a conversation that feels uncomfortable but carries the truth you've been avoiding. Maybe it's a person whose presence challenges your ego but expands your awareness. Answers don't always shine. Sometimes they confront. Life doesn't speak in straight lines. It speaks in mirrors. It shows you your own vibration reflected back through events and people. The question isn't, is the universe answering me? But rather, am I noticing how it already has? Because reality responds instantly to frequency, not words. When you shift internally, your external world begins to rearrange, subtly at first, then unmistakably. The problem is that most people only recognize answers when they match their expectations. We live in a culture that worships asking. Vision boards, affirmations, endless prayers. But asking is only half of creation. The other half is observation, the art of paying attention to how life starts moving once the question has been sent. The answer is never far. It's just often filtered through your assumptions of what it should look like. You can see this pattern everywhere. You ask for love and suddenly, every unresolved wound around intimacy resurfaces. You think you're moving backward, but you're actually being prepared to receive the kind of connection that requires honesty, not illusion. You ask for abundance and your finances get tight, not as punishment, but as a mirror showing you your relationship with scarcity. You ask for peace, and life removes every distraction that kept you from facing yourself. The process doesn't always feel like a blessing, but it is. The truth is, you've never been ignored. You've just been impatient. You wanted the answer to appear without having to change to meet it. But life doesn't deliver requests to the person you were when you asked. It delivers them to the person you're becoming through the asking. The delay between intention and manifestation is often the time it takes you to grow into the version of yourself capable of holding what you've requested. Observation is what bridges that gap. When you start watching life like a conversation instead of a battle, everything begins to make sense. Every no starts to sound like, not this way. Every loss becomes redirection. Every silence becomes incubation. Try remembering a time when something didn't work out, a job, a plan, a relationship. At first it felt like rejection. But months later, when you saw what came instead, didn't it make perfect sense? That's the pattern. Answers often reveal themselves backward, after the emotion has settled. But if you learn to observe while you're still inside the uncertainty, you begin to experience reality as guidance rather than punishment. Life's answers are rarely loud. They're quiet nudges, a sudden restlessness, an unexpected coincidence, a sense of knowing that doesn't explain itself. Observation is how you translate those whispers. The mind wants control, but the observer wants understanding. And once you start noticing the subtleties, you realize that you've been receiving feedback from reality all along. Every delay carries information. Every detour carries direction. Every discomfort points to a deeper truth. When you shift from asking why to asking what is this showing me, you start to see the architecture behind what once looked like chaos. It takes humility to admit that life might be smarter than your plans. It takes awareness to see that what looks like a closed door might actually be protection. And it takes courage to accept that sometimes what you asked for is already here, just not in the form you thought it would be. Reality speaks in contrast. It teaches through opposites. It hides your answers in situations that force you to expand your perception. That's why awareness is so powerful, because awareness lets you decode what surface sight can't. The next time something doesn't go your way, pause before calling it a failure. Ask yourself, if this is the answer to my request, what is it trying to reveal? That single question shifts you from reaction to insight. It transforms confusion into communication, and that communication is constant. Reality doesn't stop responding. It only waits for you to start noticing. Because when you finally begin to notice, you realize something deeper. The real danger is not unanswered prayers. It's living on autopilot, surrounded by answers you've already received but never recognized. It happens quietly. You wake up, check your phone, follow your routine, do what's expected. Days blur into weeks, weeks into months. You move through your life without really being in it. Nothing feels wrong enough to change, yet nothing feels fully alive either. You call it stability, but deep down, it's a slow kind of sleep, a numbness disguised as peace. Autopilot is seductive because it feels safe. It keeps you from the discomfort of uncertainty. It whispers, "This is fine, don't question it." It convinces you that predictability is the same as peace. But peace isn't the absence of movement, it's the presence of awareness. And when awareness fades, life starts shrinking without you noticing. The human mind loves routine. It creates order, efficiency, familiarity. But the soul thrives on aliveness, on discovery, on the unknown. When your days stop surprising you, when everything feels repetitive but normal, it's not a sign of balance, it's a sign that you've stopped observing. You're functioning, not living. The world around you begins to reflect that state. You stop seeing beauty in simple things. You stop noticing synchronicities. People become roles, moments become tasks. The light in your perception dims. You might still smile, still laugh, still show up, but somewhere beneath the surface, a quiet voice whispers, "Is this it?" That voice isn't boredom. It's consciousness trying to wake you. Autopilot doesn't happen overnight. It starts the moment you choose comfort over curiosity. The moment you stop asking questions like, "Why am I doing this?" or "What does this really mean to me?" It starts when you trade reflection for distraction, scrolling instead of sensing, reacting instead of noticing. Slowly, you start drifting away from your own life. You can always tell when you're on autopilot, because time moves fast, but meaning moves slow. Days fly, but nothing truly changes. You look back on months that feel like copies of each other. You can't remember the last time you felt something deeply, wonder, awe, or even pain that transformed you. Everything becomes fine. But fine is the most dangerous place you can live, because fine doesn't push you to evolve. It sedates you. Autopilot is the opposite of observation. When you're observing, you notice the smallest details, the tone in someone's voice, the way sunlight falls on your desk, the subtle shifts in your own emotions. You're awake to the signals of reality. But when you're on autopilot, those signals still come, you just don't hear them. Reality doesn't stop speaking, you just stop listening. The danger is that you start mistaking numbness for maturity. You tell yourself you've learned to stay calm, when really you've just stopped feeling. You call your disengagement discipline, your indifference patience, but real peace doesn't come from shutting down emotion. It comes from being present with it. If you look closely, you'll see how autopilot protects you from fear. The fear of change, of loss, of not knowing. It's easier to repeat what's familiar than to face what's uncertain. So you stay in jobs that don't inspire you, in relationships that don't expand you, in versions of yourself that no longer fit. You keep busy enough to avoid stillness, because stillness would make you face the truth. You've stopped living consciously. But here's the paradox. The longer you stay asleep, the louder reality tries to wake you. It starts gently with restlessness. Then come signs, small frustrations, repeated patterns, random disruptions that seem meaningless but aren't. Life begins to rearrange itself to get your attention. When you ignore the whispers, they become knocks. The routine that once gave you safety begins to feel suffocating. That's not failure. It's awakening. You see, life doesn't punish you for falling asleep. It simply refuses to let you stay there forever. It starts shaking the foundations of what you called normal until you realize that comfort and truth rarely coexist for long. Something deeper in you knows when you've outgrown your current level of awareness. And when that happens, reality intervenes. Sometimes that intervention looks like chaos. Things you depended on stop working. People you relied on start acting differently. Plans collapse. It feels like life is turning against you, but in truth, it's just removing what keeps you unconscious. Because every time you wake up from autopilot, every time you remember to observe, something extraordinary happens. You start seeing meaning in places you once ignored. You begin to notice the subtle guidance woven into your day, the conversation that mirrors your thoughts, the obstacle that redirects your timing, the coincidence that feels too precise to be random. You start realizing that reality is interactive, responsive, alive. But that awareness only appears when you stop living mechanically. The mind fears awareness because awareness demands responsibility. Once you see clearly, you can't pretend anymore. You can't blame others for choices you keep repeating. You can't hide behind "that's just how life is." Observation wakes you to your own participation in the script, and that awakening, though uncomfortable, is where freedom begins. The question is not whether you've fallen into autopilot. Everyone does. The question is whether you're willing to notice it, to pause long enough to feel your own presence again, because every moment of noticing, even for a few seconds, is enough to break the spell. Awareness doesn't require radical change, it requires attention. Look up from the screen, feel your breath, listen to the silence behind your thoughts, notice the way your body responds when something's true or false. These small acts of observation bring you back to life, literally. Reality always tries to wake you gently before it resorts to force. The whispers come first, subtle intuitions, small discomforts, quiet repetitions. But if you keep ignoring them, life has a way of turning up the volume until you can't look away. And that's where the next shift begins, when reality stops whispering and starts knocking, not to punish you, but to pull you back into alignment. You've felt those whispers before. The small tug in your gut telling you something's off. The unease you feel before saying yes to something you know you should decline. The tiredness that follows a decision that looks good on paper but feels wrong in your body. These are not random feelings. They're messages, quiet signals from reality guiding you back into alignment before the noise becomes pain. But most people ignore them. We explain them away, rationalize them, drown them out with distractions. We tell ourselves, it's just a phase. I'm overreacting. It'll get better. We choose logic over intuition, comfort over truth, and that's when the whisper has to grow louder. Reality is patient, but it's also persistent. When you don't listen to its whispers, it changes its tone. The discomfort becomes confusion, the small obstacle becomes a wall, the subtle fatigue becomes exhaustion. It's not revenge, it's communication. The universe doesn't punish, it recalibrates. It keeps sending the same message in different forms until you stop running from it. Every breakdown starts as a whisper that was ignored. The friendship that ended suddenly. There were quiet signs before, the tension in conversations, the energy that no longer matched, the job that drained you until you burned out. The signs were there, the morning dread, the disconnection, the small voice saying, "This isn't it." The body that finally forced you to rest? It had been whispering for months through fatigue, tension, or small aches. You just didn't have time to listen. The truth is, life never blindsides you. It always sends warnings, soft, subtle, and repetitive. The only reason they feel like shocks is because you dismissed them when they were still whispers. You thought you could manage, negotiate, or control your way around them. But you can't outthink what your soul already knows. Observation is what keeps whispers from turning into chaos. When you pay attention early, when you honor that quiet nudge instead of doubting it, you prevent reality from having to raise its voice. Listening at the whisper level is the highest form of wisdom. It's how you move through life with grace instead of collision. But listening requires slowing down, and slowing down is something our culture resists. We fill every silence, chase every distraction, keep ourselves busy enough to drown out intuition. We live in a constant rush toward the next thing, while the present moment, where all guidance lives, goes unnoticed. The whisper is always here, but to hear it you have to stop moving long enough to feel it. Reality speaks through repetition. If you keep facing the same situation, the same kind of relationship, the same frustration, the same delay, that's the whisper looping until you pay attention. It's saying, "There's something here you haven't learned yet." The lesson is not in the drama, it's in the pattern. And when you finally observe the pattern instead of blaming the circumstances, you begin to decode the language of your own reality. The whisper also speaks through emotion. Anxiety, resentment, boredom, they're not just feelings to escape from, they're signals. They tell you where your life has drifted out of coherence. When you suppress them, you silence your internal GPS. But when you listen, not react, just listen, those emotions reveal what needs to change. There's a softness in the early messages of life. They come as subtle dissonance, that moment when something looks fine but feels wrong. The longer you ignore that feeling, the more force reality needs to use to get your attention. What starts as a whisper becomes a conversation, then a confrontation, then a collapse. It's not cruelty, it's necessity, because reality's only goal is alignment, and alignment requires awareness. Sometimes the knock comes as loss, something or someone leaving suddenly. Sometimes it comes as failure, a plan falling apart after you've given it everything. Sometimes it comes as stillness, nothing moving no matter how hard you try. These are not punishments, they are the sound of life breaking through your illusions. They are reminders that you've been living too far from your own truth. The pain of being knocked down is not random, it's precision. Life only removes what's no longer real. It dismantles what blocks your clarity. And though it hurts, there's intelligence in that disruption, because once you fall, you finally stop running. And in that stillness, the whisper becomes audible again. You can feel this moment when it happens, the surrender after resistance, the clarity after exhaustion. It's when you realize that nothing external can fix what requires inner listening. It's when you finally stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" That shift turns the knock into guidance. Listening to reality doesn't mean you'll avoid all pain. It means pain will no longer confuse you. You'll start to see it as information instead of injustice. You'll notice how life always tries to redirect you before it has to disrupt you. The warning signs were there, gentle and consistent, waiting for you to notice. This awareness changes how you move through everything. You stop reacting to every challenge as an attack. You begin to sense the intelligence in timing, the precision in endings, the mercy hidden in delay. You stop fearing the knock because you've learned to catch the whisper. And when you live like that, aware, observant, receptive, something profound shifts inside you. You no longer see reality as an opponent, but as a collaborator. You realize it's not against you. It's communicating with you in the only language it knows: vibration, timing, pattern, repetition. Yet here's what most people never understand. That same force that whispers and knocks isn't trying to break you down. It's trying to bring you into alignment. What looks like punishment is almost always redirection. Life moving you away from resistance and closer to coherence, closer to truth. It doesn't always feel that way, does it? When things fall apart, when people leave, when plans collapse, when silence replaces certainty, it's easy to believe that life has turned on you. That may be you're being punished, ignored, or left behind, but what if what you call rejection is actually redirection? What if what you call chaos is simply your life rearranging itself to match a higher truth you haven't yet accepted? Reality isn't here to hurt you, it's here to wake you. Every disruption, every detour, every delay is an act of alignment in disguise. The problem is that alignment doesn't look peaceful while it's happening. It looks like loss. It feels like failure. It sounds like silence, because the process of aligning you requires removing what's false, and everything false resists being seen. Think about it. You've prayed for peace, and suddenly you find yourself surrounded by situations that force you to confront your own restlessness. You've asked for clarity, and now every illusion in your life is being stripped away. You've wished for freedom, and now the cages you built out of comfort are breaking open. You've wanted truth, and now people who once made you feel safe are revealing sides that make you uncomfortable. That's not punishment. That's precision. Life gives you what matches your vibration, not your wish list. The reason it feels like pain is because your old self, the version of you built on control, fear, and identity, is dissolving. And the mind doesn't like losing control. It clings to what it knows, even when what it knows is suffering. So when reality starts to realign you, the ego screams, "Why is this happening to me?" But the soul quietly whispers, "Because you're ready." Reality doesn't oppose you, it mirrors you. It doesn't give you what you want, it gives you what you are. When you shift internally, your external world follows suit. It's not instant and it's not always gentle, but it's exact. The people, places, and patterns in your life adjust to match your new level of awareness. Some leave, some transform, some enter. It's all alignment in motion. But alignment often demands honesty, and honesty isn't comfortable. It forces you to face the stories you've told yourself about who you are, what you deserve, and what you're allowed to have. It asks you to stop pretending that the half-life you've built is enough. And so reality starts shaking the ground beneath what's fake until only what's real can remain standing. You might think you've lost your direction when, in truth, you're being placed exactly where you need to be. You might think you're standing still, but you're actually being positioned. Alignment is less about movement and more about matching. Sometimes the universe doesn't move you forward. It moves the world around you until it fits your frequency. That's why patience is a form of wisdom, because what looks like delay is often synchronization. Life isn't late, it's accurate. The events you think are off schedule are happening at the only moment when you're aligned enough to receive their meaning. Every time you resist reality, you create friction. Every time you surrender to it, you create flow. Resistance comes from the mind that believes it knows best. Flow comes from the heart that trusts what it feels. Reality is always working with you, not against you, but you have to meet it halfway. You have to stop treating every challenge like an enemy and start treating it like a teacher. There's a quiet intelligence in how life unfolds. Notice how what once devastated you later revealed itself as a gift. How endings became beginnings. How losses made room for something better. How heartbreak softened you into compassion. You can't see alignment while it's happening. You can only recognize it in hindsight. That's why trust is so essential. Trust doesn't mean liking what's happening. It means recognizing that what's happening is purposeful, even if your mind can't yet see the purpose. It means knowing that nothing leaves your life unless something more aligned is trying to take its place. The question is never, why did this happen? The real question is, what is this trying to make room for? Reality doesn't make mistakes. It mirrors your deepest state of being with exact precision. When you feel lost, it reflects confusion. When you feel clear, it reflects synchronicity. When you start living honestly, choosing what feels right instead of what looks safe, life begins to open up in ways you can't predict but can always recognize. And yet, most people keep fighting this alignment. They keep trying to rebuild what life has already dismantled. They chase old versions of themselves, old relationships, old plans, thinking that stability equals safety. But reality can't support what's no longer true. The moment you cling to what's expired, reality begins to remove it. That's not cruelty, it's coherence. Life cannot hold what's out of rhythm with your evolution. You can feel when you're in alignment. There's a sense of ease, not because everything is perfect, but because everything feels connected. You act from clarity instead of reaction. You sense timing instead of forcing it. You begin to trust the unseen more than the predictable. That's when reality stops pushing you and starts moving with you. So when things fall apart, when doors close, when people disappear, remember, it's not rejection, it's resonance. You're being aligned, not abandoned. What's leaving is making space for what's more true. Life is never punishing you, it's preparing you. And as you start to see that every disruption carries intelligence, every delay hides precision, every loss holds direction, something begins to shift. You start to understand that even pain itself isn't working against you. It only appears when you resist what's trying to guide you. The punishment you think you're receiving is actually the gift you asked for, just wrapped in an unexpected way. Life is not trying to break you. It's trying to free you from what you've outgrown. Every ending, every delay, every silence has been guiding you closer to your truth. The lesson is never about loss. It's about recognition. What if everything that felt unfair was actually life answering your request for alignment in a form you didn't yet understand? If this message reached you, write in the comments, "Reality is aligning me, not rejecting me." That's how I'll know you stayed until the end and are ready to live from awareness, not fear. And if this spoke to something deep in you, watch one of the videos appearing on your screen right now. It will take you even further into this kind of clarity and connection.